On this super review, let's take a look at the BGVP DM6. All right, I'm actually really excited about this one. So what we've got here is the BGVP DM6. It's an in-ear monitor headphone that has got 5 balanced armature drivers per ear. Now, the number of drivers doesn't necessarily mean that much. What does matter though is that it's a BA driver headphone, no dynamics. I believe it's gonna be a really, I don't know, custom style fit and seal, which is gonna appeal to some people. But I've heard a lot of really good things about the sound signature of this headphone, and that's what I'm interested in checking out. Worth calling out that the DM6 is a relatively expensive in-ear headphone. This thing costs around 200 bucks, and that's if you can find it. It's been actually kind of difficult to get a hold of a pair of DM6s, although from what I understand, after the Chinese New Year, these things are gonna start to be a lot more easily bought. And so, well, we've got it here. Let's go ahead and open it up. We'll find out what we get inside the box of the DM6. Then I'll give it a listening test, run it against my reference library of music, compare it to all my other favorite IEMs. And I'll come back and I'll let you know, is this thing worth 200 bucks? Is this thing worth the wait? That's what we'll find out. All right, so we got the BGVP DM6 sitting here in a box. And I have already, for your pleasure, removed the plastic covering, but otherwise, this thing's brand new. So let's take a quick tour of the box and see what we can find out about it. On the front, they claim the best experience, and they've got a high-res audio sticker. That seems to be plastered on there. And look, frankly, high-res audio, it doesn't mean much to me. Top, bottom, left, right, no information. But here in the back, we do have a little bit. All right, we've got our specs either in Chinese or English, and I'll go with the English ones for today. Maybe another day I'll do those. But to start with, drivers, 5 balanced armatures per earphone. That's what we expect. Sensitivity of 122 dBSPL, which I still haven't figured out exactly what that means, but 122 is a much higher number than usual. Usually it's like 105, 110. 122, interesting. Impedance of 20 ohms, which is slightly higher than most in-ears, but the frequency response of 10 hertz to 40 kilohertz, that's pretty typical. Distortion rate, less than 0.5%. Channel difference, I don't know. These are all claims that frankly are not gonna mean too much to me. What's gonna matter is what does this thing sound like? But to start with, let's go and find out what's inside this box. All right, so we got the BGVP DM6 completely unboxed. And this is what you get. You get a little quality certificate, which is always nice to see, especially when they're triangles. I don't know why, I really like them when they're triangles. You get this manual, which I'm not quite sure what that is, because then you also get this manual. And this one is exactly the right length for a manual for a pair of headphones. Look at that, it's 1 page. That's all you need to know. And then up here, you do get a very nice selection of ear tips, including 1 pair of foam tips. Unfortunately, it's only 1 pair and it's only in 1 size, it's large. But you do get the foam tips, which is nice. And then you get 3 sets of 2 different styles of silicone tips, including wide bores and small bores. And like it seems to be pretty standard, the medium tips of the wide bore is what they have pre-installed. Interestingly, the BGVP DM6 does also come with a very small toothbrush, which, I mean, I wouldn't use that on my teeth, but you probably could use it to clean these things. I wonder if they thought of that. And then let's get to this cable that the DM6 comes with, which is, in my opinion, this is a really unique and pretty handsome looking cable. This thing is like, it's actually silver. It's actually silver. It's like, it's kind of got like a grayish, almost a pewter look to it, but that is pretty handsome. And it's got a chin slider, which is a little rubbery and a little soft, and it looks like it's gonna be perfectly functional, but frankly, that chin slider is not that attractive. The Y connector has got this nice little metal chunk, and then down here at the terminal, this is a beefy terminal. I don't know, this seems like it might actually be a little bit too beefy for me. I'm gonna be plugging this thing into my Walkman, and this terminal, okay, it's not actually that heavy, but that is beefier than, frankly, I need, but it does look cool. And then we get up here to the hooks, which are preformed, thank goodness. No metal hooks in here, which is great, or no metal wires. And they're MMCX connectors. And then we get to the earbuds, which are actually a little bit smaller and lighter weight than I expected them to be. It kind of has the weight of a hollow plastic earphone. That's actually kind of surprising. Mine are in this, I think, pretty attractive, translucent purple color. I don't know, I think that's a pretty handsome look. What do you think? And then, you know, the shell is very much conformed to the inside of an ear, and hopefully your ear is this shape. I don't know, looking at it, I can't tell if my ear is that shape, but I think it'll fit pretty well. As far as I can tell, there's no venting on this earphone, which means that it's probably gonna be sealing out quite a bit of sound, but also might create some comfort issues depending on your personal preferences. But look, I don't need to speculate on this sort of stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and hook them up, bring in my Walkman, listen to these things, run them against my reference library of music, listen to these things compared to some other similarly priced headphones, although frankly, look, at 200 bucks, this is currently the most expensive headphone that I've got, or at least in terms of in-ear monitors. 200 bucks, well, what is this thing up against? I would say, you know, visually and build-wise, I think this thing looks a lot like the 10 Hertz P4 Pro, so I'll run it against that. But probably my favorite sounding headphones close to this price range would be the Eko OH1, which is around 140 bucks, so quite a bit cheaper. But I'm also interested in comparing these things to my favorite headphones, which at this point are still the T2 Pro and the Tin Hi-Fi T3. So that's what these things are up against. I'm gonna go ahead and I'll take these away. I'll test them for a little bit and I'll come back and I'll let you know. How is the BGVP DM6? Is this thing worth 200 bucks or should you be looking elsewhere? All right, let's talk about the BGVP Heebie-Jeebie. All right, it's not actually called the Heebie-Jeebie. Of course, this is the DM6, and this is a very popular earphone on YouTube. Had a lot of questions about this, and frankly, a lot of anticipation about what this thing might sound like. And if I'm totally honest, I think this is a great sounding headphone. It's just not quite my favorite sound signature. So, look, if you haven't listened to a lot of headphones, you might think that there's just sort of this scale of like bad headphones to good headphones. And then you know, some headphones are either really good headphones or they're really bad headphones. But the truth of the matter is that there is this range of good to bad headphones. But there's a lot of room for preference in there. And then there's also just a lot of variation in sound signature, right? It's not a 2D axis. This is a 3-dimensional axis where you've got good and bad on one dimension, and then in a completely different dimension, you've got a warm sound, you've got a bright sound, you've got large sound stage, you've got intimate, and all of these things are not necessarily good or bad, they're just kind of up to your personal preferences. And when it comes to the DM6, I think this is a very good sounding headphone, but it's not quite to my personal preferences. But before we get too deep into the sound signature, let's start with the build quality of this headphone, which for a $200 headphone is doing some pretty interesting things, some things that are unique and different than other headphones, some of which I'm not sure I'm totally in love with, but overall I think it's a pretty nicely built thing. So starting with the buds, they are this plastic, this acrylic, and I think they're pretty handsome looking. But if I had one small complaint with it, and maybe it's a small complaint, I don't know. It seems to bother me more than it probably should, but The shells are hollow, and compared to something like the 10 Hz P4 Pro, which is a cheaper headphone, those shells appear to be like a solid acrylic or solid resin or whatever plastic they use to make them. And it gives them a nice weight, almost like a glass-like characteristic. These are hollow, or at least as far as I can tell, these things are hollow on the inside. It makes them lighter weight, and it just makes them feel more like plastic and less like glass. Is that a big deal? I don't know. It just overall, like it makes it feel like it's not quite as plush as a $200 earphone should feel, but maybe I'm getting nitpicky, right? And then one other quick note about the shape of the shells is that they fit very, very secure. Maybe too secure for some people. Look, I find them actually a little bit bulky in my ears, but the shape of it generally just fits in my ear, and it becomes a piece of my ear. Definitely a tight fit. Definitely very secure, and also I'd say that, you know, the isolation because of that is pretty strong. We get into the cable. Again, this cable is doing some different stuff. It is, well, first of all, I don't know if you can tell how heavy and weighted this thing feels, but it's a pretty heavy feeling cable, and I like that aspect of it. Like a lot of other IEMs, it comes with a braided cable, but the texture of this and the look of it is very, very different. It's got this rubbery silver look to it that's actually a little bit stiff compared to some other IEM cables, but generally I actually quite liked it. I was a little worried about this end, this little terminal end, this jack. It feels like you could club someone over the head with it. And I was worried that it might feel, I don't know, just a little cumbersome, right? And I do think it's a bit much, but I didn't actually have any issues with it in terms of usability. So overall, I'd say I like the cable and I like the build of this headphone. It's just maybe not quite exactly what I expected of a $200 earphone. That said, I actually do have one pretty significant issue with the build of the DM6, and it is the fact that, in my experience, the tips fall off of this thing way, way too easily. There were, I don't know, maybe like a half a dozen times that I pulled, you know, the DM6 out of my ears and the ear tips were left stuck inside my ears, which is not a fun feeling. I've gotten pretty good at removing them, but look, that is not a good feeling. And frankly, for a $200 headphone, that's kind of inexcusable. That problem is especially bad with the stock silicone ear tips. They just feel like they're sized one size too big for these nozzles. You might see here, I've got a slightly different silicone tip on here just because it fits a little bit tighter and it does hold it on a little bit better. I've definitely had better luck with these, but just keep in mind that is something you're gonna have to, I would just watch out for that, because you don't wanna get in a situation where you've got an ear tip stuck in your ear and you don't have like a pair of tweezers or a friend to help you take it out, because that's, I don't know, that seems like it could go really bad. Fortunately for me, it hasn't gone really bad yet. But then that gets us talking about the sound, which is kind of where I started talking about this headphone as a really good sounding headphone, but not quite the signature that I love. So the overall sound signature of this, I would describe as a warm sounding headphone, which is to say that like the bass regions and the lower mid range, I don't want to say that they're overwhelming, but they are definitely a stronger presence in this than, say, the upper mid-range, right? I think my preferred sound signature has got a rise in the upper mid-range that tends to play up vocals and trumpets and electric guitars and stuff like that, whereas this feels relatively flat, right? I think the bass is a little bit elevated, and then maybe just kind of like a slow decline from the bass region through the mid-range, and then through the upper mid-range, there's not really that little extra hump that I'm usually looking for. And the effect of that is that, again, it's just kind of a warm sounding headphone that's not as forward in the vocals as I tend to like. I think another effect of that fairly flat upper mid-range is that the sound can come across as slightly congested. Not that like the soundstage isn't big, because the soundstage in these is actually pretty strong, but there's just like, I don't know, there's like a lack of transparency in the sound that you would get with something like the TIN Hi-Fi T3 or T2 Pro. That, look, that's the kind of sound I'm generally looking for, and it's not here. This is just a warm sounding headphone that actually has pretty strong treble energy. So even though that upper mid-range is not emphasized, there is actually pretty strong treble in here, and I've seen some people say that it's too much, and for me, it's not too much. I like the treble on this. If I had one issue with the treble, it's that I do think that these things are a little bit more sibilant than average. In fact, maybe quite a bit more sibilant than average. That's not to say that the DM6 is introducing sibilance in songs that don't have it. It's just, if there's music that you like that is sibilant, Freddie Mercury, his vocals are particularly bad at this. If you have any music that has sibilance in it, I think these things are gonna play it up a little bit more than, maybe quite a bit more than your average earphone. In fact, I was noticing sibilance in some music that I've listened to a lot and never really thought of as sibilant, including some Michael Jackson recordings. But then I went back and listened to them with some other earphones. I'm like, okay, yeah, there is some sibilance there, but it really is emphasized on the DM6. That said, when you're listening to music that doesn't have issues with sibilance, and you're listening to music that's got really nice strong bass lines and a really nice mid-range, these things start to shine. The soundstage on these things, I would say, is excellent. These things feel really large. The precision and like the imaging, I would say, is not as strong as something like the T3. My personal preferences, or maybe that's just kind of how I identify sounds. And I think, again, a lot of that has to do with that congested sound that you get with the relaxed upper mid-range. But you do still get plenty of detail. In fact, this is like one of the most fun headphones that I have to listen to at low volumes, right? A lot of headphones that I have, the more I increase the volume, the more that the detail becomes apparent, and it maybe encourages some bad behavior where I'm blasting those things and I don't need to be. It might be bad for my hearing, but a lot of headphones just sound better loud. This is a headphone that I think doesn't require a ton of volume to get that detail and that fun in picking out the details in music. So I guess that's actually one thing that's pretty positive for this. And generally, I would say it's a pretty relaxing listen. I don't know, maybe relaxing is actually the wrong word. It's laid back for sure, but the bass on this is really strong, and then the treble is really strong. So it does have a V to it. It's just that warmer sound characteristic, I think, gives it more of a laid back listen than something that's a little bit more engaging like the T3. Another thing worth calling out about the DM6 is that this is a very, very sensitive IEM. And surprisingly, like, the hiss is not especially bad on these things either, right? So I'm listening to these on my Sony A45, which with sensitive IEMs tends to hiss a little bit, and that's just when there's no music playing. And these are very sensitive, right? I don't need a lot of power to get a lot of volume out of these things. But the hiss is not too bad, and I think that's definitely a strength of it. So if I were to rate the BGVP DM6 out of 5 stars, I'd give it a solid 4 stars out of 5. Look, for $200, I think that the build's okay. It's not great. For $200, I start to get a little bit pickier. So there is that. The biggest issue I have with the build is the fact that these ear tips come off so easily, and I find that kind of inexcusable. When it comes to the sound, look, it's not my favorite sound signature, but there's definitely a lot to love here, as long as you're listening to music that isn't particularly sibilant, because this will play up the sibilance. Just a lot of detail. Again, like a pretty relaxing, laid back listen, but also still really engaging without requiring a ton of volume. And for me, I could probably use something like that a little bit more often. If you're interested in checking out the BGVP DM6, of course, I've got links in the description down below. While you're down there, you can hit the like button for the video, assuming you liked it. You can subscribe to the channel, and then I'll see you in the next super review.